Hi there, my name is Brandon and you're watching the Your Right Website YouTube channel. Today's video is a developer tutorial that's going to go over how to install WordPress in a local development environment using the Roots stack, mainly Roots Bedrock and Roots Sage. If you're not familiar with the Roots stack, what it does is it allows for modern WordPress development. What's cool about that is you're going to get access to a lot of cool things that you don't have access to in stock WordPress. Things like the Blade templating engine, which comes over from Laravel. You're going to get access to these things called composers, which are basically ways to pre-process your data before rendering your view. So unlike with stock WordPress, where you have a PHP file and you're mixing your HTML in with your PHP, in the Roots stack with Sage, you're going to be able to separate your backend logic from your front-end presentation logic. You're also going to get, with Bedrock, a more modern WordPress development environment. You're going to get a new file structure. You're going to get a WordPress environment that works with Composer, so you can automatically update your packages and your plugins without having to go into WordPress, which is really cool when you have a site on a live, dev, and local environment and you need them all to have the same versions of plugins, because you can lock that down with Composer. So in today's tutorial, we're going to go over how to get a site running using the Roots stack with Bedrock and Sage on a local development environment. And we're going to be using a tool called Lando to do that. And what's cool about Lando is that it's this local development environment that works with Docker. So you're going to get a Lando file that you can put in your project, and it's going to define all of the details about your environment to spin up a Docker instance. So you're able to specify the PHP version. So you can put, I want PHP 8.3 or PHP 8.2, whatever you want. You can tell it to install Composer for package management. You can tell it to install MySQL or some other database. And you can have it install Node and all of the other build tools that you need. So you're not actually installing anything other than Docker and Lando on your host system, which is really cool because you don't have to worry about like an OS update or anything like that breaking your system. So to get started, we're going to take a look at the Lando site, which is lando.dev. And you're going to want to go to Get Lando. Now, if you're on Linux like I am, the best way to install it is just with this terminal command here. This one command is going to do everything that's required to install Lando. If you're on Windows or Mac, the installation process is a little bit more complicated. I believe that you're going to need Docker Desktop installed first before installing Lando. So you would install Docker Desktop on Windows or Mac, and then you would install Lando after that. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow Lando to work with Docker. On Linux, it's really easy because this installation command, this copies down all of the Docker packages that you need. But it's a little more complicated on Mac or Linux. So once you get this command running on your system and you get Lando installed, we're going to be ready to move on to the next step of the process, which is actually installing the Roots stack. Using Lando. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a site using Bedrock, which is the modern WordPress starting point for WordPress sites that Roots provides. And we're going to be able to use this. You can see that with the Bedrock stack, you're going to get a newer file structure to WordPress compared to the standard WordPress structure. And this is going to allow for a more secure WordPress environment, as well as one, like I mentioned, that's manageable through Composer. This setup makes it really easy to manage a WordPress site with version control like Git. So we're going to go through, we're going to install Bedrock first as our base, and then we're going to be installing Sage, which is the starter theme for WordPress, which out of the box comes with Tailwind CSS and Laravel Blade. And some other functionality that makes things really easy from a modern development standpoint to work with WordPress, this really is going to take your WordPress development and move it forward into the modern era of web development. It's going to have things like the Blade template language, which is going to help keep your templates a lot cleaner. And like I mentioned, there's also those composers, which are going to keep all of your database logic and your loop logic and all of that WordPressy stuff that you'd normally either put in functions.php or just put in your template file. It's going to keep it separate from your actual presentation logic HTML. It's also going to come with Bud.js, which is going to help build your CSS files. And we'll go into how to actually do a build of CSS. And even though this comes with Tailwind, I'll show you how to install Bootstrap or just a basic Sass processor. I prefer using no CSS framework, but you can install either Tailwind or Bootstrap with this as well. So let's go ahead and jump over to the terminal and get started in this installation process. If you're following along, these commands should work on Linux and Mac. If you're on Windows, your terminal may be a little bit different. I haven't actually worked with this setup on Windows, but on Mac and Linux, things should work pretty well. And on Windows, you can try and follow along and leave any comments if something doesn't work. So we're going to jump over to the terminal now. Okay, so we're going to jump into our terminal and we're going to start setting up our project. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my code directory. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new directory for this project. So we can just do mkdir, and I'm going to call it Sage Demo. So now we have that, and we're going to cd into the demo folder. You can also create a new directory using, your Windows File Explorer or your code editor if you need to. I'm just doing it through the terminal here. If you wanted to make this project using version control, like from GitHub, what I would recommend is instead creating your new repository in GitHub and doing a git clone to your code directory, and the name of your repository would be the name of your directory. So if you want to use Git for storing this project, which I highly recommend, you can go ahead and do that as well. For the sake of this demo, though, I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to be putting anything in version control. So now we have our Sage demo folder. So now we're going to jump into VS Code and we're going to actually start working with this project. You can see here in my VS Code, I am in the Sage demo folder that I created, and there's nothing here, which is to be expected. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a Lando file. So the way you do this is do new file, and then you're going to name it .lando.yml. You're going to have this blank Lando file, and this is going to be where we specify our Lando recipe. So our Lando recipe is going to tell Docker what to install on the container. So I'm going to go ahead and copy over a Lando file from another project, paste it in here. So the key things to note are the name. So you usually want to have the name be the same as the project directory that you're working in. So this one is Sage Demo, so we will just call this Sage Demo. And then the recipe, this is going to correspond with a recipe that is on Lando's website. They have recipes for a lot of popular software like WordPress, Laravel. So the recipe is going to determine kind of some baseline things, such as your credentials for logging into the database, maybe some server config. So you want to choose the right recipe. In this case, we're working with WordPress, so we're going to choose WordPress. In this case, we do need a different web root. We're going to just call it web, because that is where Bedrock is actually going to store the files for WordPress in a separate directory. We're going to go ahead and install PHP 8.3, which is the latest version of PHP at the time of filming. And then we're going to install Composer. And we're also going to go ahead and install Node version 20. You could install a previous version, but I found Node version 20 works really well with Sage. So you can go ahead and install that. And then this .env file, we'll talk about this later, but this is just saying that we're going to use an environment variable file for some of our config information. Now we're going to switch back to our terminal and start running some commands to actually install the Bedrock project. Now you can follow along with these commands in the video. I'm also going to have all of these commands available for you in a blog post on my website. So you can see down in the description, there will be a link to that blog post to go along with this video. But the first thing that we're going to do is we need to spin up our Lando instance. So we're just going to go Lando start, and we're going to make sure that Lando actually creates our site. Okay. So Lando's going to do its thing. It's going to pull down all of our packages that we need, such as PHP. You can see it's pulling down MariaDB for the database. It's pulling down Node. It's starting all its services. And hopefully in a second here, we should get our local dev site up and running. There we go. So you'll see that it created some app server URLs. This is the one we're going to want to use, https sagedemo.lando.site. Right now it's throwing a 404 because there's actually nothing there. But once Lando is up and running, we can run a command to install Bedrock. So the command you want to run is Lando composer create project Roots Bedrock. And this is going to tell Lando to go out and create us a new Bedrock project. So it's going to go ahead and download everything we need. And you should now see, if we look at VS Code, we have a Bedrock directory. Now you could leave things like this. If you do, you're going to need to update this web directory to be Bedrock Web, because you can see that there's now a web directory here. I like to move everything back to the root of the project. So you can do that at least on Linux with these commands. So we're going to go in and we're going to run a command to tell the shell to look at the hidden files. We're going to move the Bedrock directory back to the parent, the contents of it. We're going to move it back to the parent. And then we're going to just remove the Bedrock directory. And now, if we look at our file structure, you should see that the Bedrock directory is gone and all of the files are at the parent level, which is how you would want your project to look. So if you're using Windows, or if that command did not work, what you can do is you can manually move all of the files from your Bedrock directory up to the parent directory using File Explorer. You'll want to make sure that the .dot files are also copied. So if you're working on Windows, you're going to want to make sure that Show Hidden Files and Folders is enabled, as well as Show File Extensions, because otherwise Windows doesn't always play nice with those things. So now that we have our files in the right spot, we can go ahead and continue with configuring our environment. So now that we have our Bedrock installed, we need to set up our environment file, our .env file. And what this is going to do is this is going to tell Lando more about our local environment, such as database, credentials, site URL, things like that. So you'll notice in the project there's this .env.example file. What we want to do is we want to create a new file, and we're just going to call it .env. Now, if you're working with source control, you want to make sure that this .env file is added to your git ignore list, because this env file is going to contain all of your sensitive information, like your database password. This env file should be unique to each environment. So you're going to have one for dev, one for live, one for local. And you never want to check your .env file into source control. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy our example file, and we're just going to paste it in here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to this URL here, and generate our authentication salts. So if we paste that in, you can see that we get two options, one for ENV and one for YAML. We're using an ENV file, so we're just going to copy this data, and then we're going to go ahead and paste it back into our ENV file. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and update some more information. We're going to update our database credentials. Since we're using Lando and the WordPress recipe, the credentials are just going to be WordPress all across the board. Database name is WordPress. The user is WordPress. The password is WordPress. We're also going to need to update our database host. Instead of localhost, we're going to call this database. If you want to use a different WordPress database prefix, you can also update this DB prefix here. In this case, we're going to leave that to the default, which is WP. Now there's this bit about environment here, ENV, and right now it's set to development, which is okay because we are using a development environment. If you wanted to go live, you would switch this to production. The difference is in development, you're going to get more access to errors, error logs and things like that. And it's also going to, by default, keep your site from showing up in search engines, as well as some additional debugging things that Sage kind of enables when you're on a development environment. So the last thing that we're going to want to update is this WP home URL. And we are going to want to go back to our terminal and find the URL that we had set up for the site, which was, it was somewhere in here. If you ever lose the URL like I just did, you can do a Lando info, and that's going to show you all of the details of your Lando config. So here's the URL, Sage demo, and we're just going to go ahead and copy that and paste that in. And you do not want that trailing slash. So now we have that. So we're going to go back over to our terminal, and we need to reload Lando so it knows about the new config. So we're going to do Lando rebuild-y. And that's going to tell Lando reload everything and use the new config file that we just put in place. So it's going to pull things down, and we'll give it a second here.
2 hours later.
Okay, and through the magic of editing, we've skipped Lando taking its time to re-download things like PHP. So now we have our site, and you can see we're getting a actual status code 302. So what we're going to want to do before we get into WordPress, we're going to go ahead and install Acorn, which is another dependency of the Roots stack. So you could continue on to install WordPress without it, but you'd run into problems later. So we're going to go ahead and install Acorn first. So the command for that is Lando composer require roots acorn. So we're going to go ahead and run that, and that's going to pull down another package. And now we're good to go. So we're going to go ahead and load up the site. I'm just going to copy the URL, and then we can go into here, and we're going to be able to install WordPress. So just choose your language. And I'm going to go ahead and create the site and get everything set up. So I'm just using a weak password here. Please don't use admin. Put in a fake email address. And here you can choose whether to discourage search engines from indexing the site. Like I mentioned, even if you don't check that, and I'll show you, I'm not going to check that, but we're going to go ahead and install it. So if we log in, because we are using Bedrock, you can see Bedrock's giving us a message here that says search engine indexing has been discouraged. So that little checkbox is being overridden because we have development in our env file. So this is a really nice kind of sanity check to make sure that your development sites aren't getting picked up by Google as you're building them out. So now we have WordPress up and running. So what we need to do now is actually install Sage 10. So what we can do is we can go back to our terminal. We can change directories into our themes folder, which is just web app themes, assuming you're at the root of the project. And then we're going to go ahead and tell Lando to run Composer to install Sage. So this demo theme here, should be the name of the theme that you want to install. So we will just leave it demo theme for the sake of this project, but this can be whatever theme name you want. We're going to go ahead and hit enter, and it's going to go ahead and pull down the requirements for the package. Now we have our theme installed. Okay, now we have Sage installed. So what we're going to do is we're going to first set up the config file for the Bud builder, which is going to actually build our theme assets. So we're going to go ahead and go into Web App Themes, and then we have our demo theme here, and we're going to want to find our bud.config.js. And we're going to want to update this proxy URL. This should be the same URL that we're using in our .env file. And this will help when doing local development. So now that that has been updated, what we can do is we can change into the directory for the demo theme. And then what we want to do is we want to SSH in and run node. So we can go Lando SSH-S node. And then what we need to do is we need to do a yarn command, and that's going to pull down all of our JavaScript packages required to build our CSS and JS assets. It'll just take a second the first time. Almost. Okay, now that it's finished, we can do a yarn build command, and what that's going to do is that's going to actually build your CSS assets. And now you can see it has completed the build. So what we're going to do next now is we can actually go into WordPress and activate our theme. So if we go to Appearance and Themes, you'll see that we have our Sage Starter theme here, and we're going to just go ahead and activate that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just make a new page, add a new page, call it Home. And we're going to go ahead and actually just publish that page. Go back to WordPress, and we're going to go to Appearance. Actually, it's under Settings, Reading, set a static page, and just go Home. So if we save the changes and we visit the site, you'll see that we have our site loading here with the home page. And we can go back into Pages just to verify that it's working. Edit the page. This is some sample content, save it, and if we reload, you'll see we're loading our content. Now, the Sage theme, right out of the box, is very minimal. You can see there's no styling here. This looks pretty darn ugly. So we can go ahead and do some enhancements to make this thing look a little more pretty. So I think the first thing we need to do is figure out, what CSS framework do we want to use. Like I mentioned, Tailwind comes with Sage out of the box. I'm not the biggest Tailwind fan, not the biggest Bootstrap fan either, you can install Tailwind or Bootstrap, or you can just go with vanilla CSS with Sass preprocessing, and that's the route we're going to go today with this tutorial, but I'll show you where to get the details to install Bootstrap if that's more your flavor. So we're going to go ahead and start that now. So I've jumped around over to the Sage website. They have a very good article about replacing Tailwind CSS with Bootstrap. So as I mentioned, it comes with Tailwind CSS out of the box. If you want to use Bootstrap instead, you can follow along with me and this article. This article will also be linked in the description as well. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and remove Tailwind. So we need to be at the node terminal, which you can see we are with the node at the beginning of the terminal here, because we are running a yarn command. So we're going to go ahead and run the yarn command to remove Tailwind. So then we want to find our resources styles app.css and remove the Tailwind items. So if we go back into our VS Code, we can go to resources styles app.css, remove our Tailwind items. We're going to want to delete the Tailwind config file. So the Tailwind config file is right down here at the root of the theme. Just yank that guy out. We're going to want to go back to that bud.config.js, and we're going to want to remove our Tailwind modifiers and replace that just with an enable modifier. So we're going to go ahead and find that file, bud config. Where are those guys located? They are located at the bottom. So we just want to replace that with enable. And then we're going to want to remove Tailwind from jsconfig.json. So that's going to be at the bottom as well. I think it's just Tailwind CSS we'll want to remove. So now we have removed Tailwind from the project. First thing you want to do for Bootstrap is install Sass. So we're going to open this setup guide. So we are still at a yarn terminal. So we're going to go ahead and run this command to add Sass in. And then what we're going to want to do is rename our CSS files to SCSS so they can be compiled. So those were under resources styles. We're just going to rename it to SCSS and rename to SCSS. And the difference between the files is app, this is what's shown on the front end, and then editor, this is what's shown inside of the WordPress Gutenberg editor. So if we go back to here, we can configure a style int if you want. If you want a style int, you can follow these directions. For the sake of this demo, I'm not going to be doing that. And then there's just more information about adding style int. So now that we have Sass installed, if you wanted to continue on with the process of adding Bootstrap, you would go ahead and follow through the rest of this guide to install Bootstrap. As I mentioned, I'm not going to be installing Bootstrap. I'm just going to be using pure SCSS. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to app.scss. And what I usually like to do is make a new folder called app. And then we're going to have a new file. We're just going to call this testing.scss. So now that we have our Sass file, we can go ahead and modify this. So we are actually pulling in our testing CSS file. So you can just do @import, and then you want to do, starting from the path of the app.scss, so app, and then testing.scss, of course with a semicolon at the end. So what we can do here is we can define some styles. I'm just going to create some test styles to make sure this is working. So we're going to do P, color, red, important. And if we run this, we're going to go back to our terminal. And when you want to build your assets, you can just do yarn build. You don't need to do just plain yarn. You can just do yarn build, and that's going to build your CSS assets for you. And then if we go back over to our browser and we view our demo site, we should see things. Well, now we can see that the Tailwind styles have been removed first off. And now we also have our paragraph style in red. So if we take a look at this header here, this is actually an H1, so we can verify that things are working properly here. So we can do H1 color blue. We can go ahead and do that and rerun the CSS build. And if we take a look, the CSS for the header is now blue. So now we have a functioning site using the Sage framework, and we are building our CSS. So now from here, the next step would be to actually start building out the theme. I think that's going to be a topic for another video. If you guys like what you've seen so far, please leave a comment down below, and I'll think about making another video. I think I am going to be making some more videos on this topic. Before we go, though, I'm actually going to give you just a little taste kind of the theme structure for a Sage 10 theme. So as I mentioned, there is blade files in the theme. There's composers. It's kind of a different structure from a normal WordPress theme. So if we take a look at our demo theme, you'll see that we have this resources folder. This is where the bulk of things are going to be. So if we go into styles, we've already played around in here. This is where our styles are. And we've got our app file. And then I made this directory for app. I like to keep things nice and organized. But the main ones that come with Sage are app.scss and editor.scss. We have our views folder, and this is going to be where all of your template files are. So you'll see we have files like index.blade.php and page.blade.php. So these are replacing the stock WordPress templates. So instead of having a index.php, all of your template files are now going to be loading using Blade. So you can see here we're using the Blade syntax language. And you can see like this file, for instance, has a partial. So we have our template, but we're also including a partial, and that's under here. And page, it's called page header. And you can see this is where the title is actually coming from. So the cool thing about Sage 10 is with these Blade files and these partials, you can have one partial that's reused in a lot of different places, and that's similar to a includes in PHP. It's just using it with the Blade syntax. Looking at the rest of our layout, scripts, this is where you'd put any JavaScript that you want, and I think in a future video we're going to go over how to add in jQuery if you want to use jQuery, because right now the way this is configured, it doesn't have jQuery. I know there's some debate online about whether jQuery is still relevant or not. I kind of like it for WordPress development. Right now the way this is configured, jQuery is not available to you. But we'll go, I think, in a future video over how to add JavaScript files and include jQuery, things like that. Images, you can put any images that need to be baked into the theme in this folder. Things like little graphics, like the little arrow icon for like a accordion or a menu. Little icons. That's the word I'm looking for. Icons. And then fonts. Any fonts you want to keep hosted on the site. And when you build your site, the CSS, JavaScript, and any fonts, things like that, they get put in this public directory. And you'll see we get our app file, and this just has our same CSS rules that we made before with the header and paragraph colors. So that is where the actual CSS is compiled to. And then we will also have in our theme, we will have our vendor folder. This is where all of the composer stuff comes from. This won't be checked into source control. Neither will this node modules folder, which is all of our stuff for Yarn. And then if we go back into resources, actually it's not in resources, it's up a level in app. If we go to view, this is where those composers I was talking about earlier are, the things that get data. So the way that this works is data gets passed from a composer to a specific blade view. And I'm kind of getting ahead into the topic of the next video, but just want to show you this real quick because it's pretty darn cool. If we go in like app.php, you'll see that there's this protected static views section here, and it's just doing star. What that means is the stuff in this controller or composer is being passed into every single blade view. So any blade view, any file with the .blade.php extension can use these variables. So we have our with method here, and this one is just getting a site name, and we're just calling a function within the class to get our blog info to get the site name. You can add a lot more to this, but the key thing to note is that there's a variable named site name that's available to every single blade view now. If we go to comments.php, this is another controller, and this is a little more built out so you can see how these work. You can see this one is just getting, it's only applying the data to a blade view in the partials folder named comments. So if we take a look where that guy is, we can go to resources, views, partials, and then comments. And this is the blade view that corresponds to this controller or composer. I keep calling them controllers because in Sage 9 they were controllers. In Sage 10 they are composers, which is different from PHP, the composer package library. Very confusing naming convention, but the composers is what gets the data, and you can see this one is returning things like a title, responses, previous, next, paginated, and closed. These are variables that are going to be available within this comments.php. You can see them being used, and then they're just calling functions here that are getting the data. So that keeps the comments.blade.php file clear of all of this kind of back-end logic, and just makes it really easy to add your back-end logic while keeping your presentation layer pretty clean looking. So I think that's where we're gonna end the video today. This was just meant to be kind of a overview of the Bedrock and Roots stack with Sage 10 for WordPress. If you have questions about any of this, feel free to leave them in the comments. I am also available for paid mentorship sessions if you want to do a one-on-one with me where we can walk through this and walk through some more advanced WordPress development. If you like this content, please comment, like, subscribe, all of that usual stuff, just to let the algorithm know that you liked it, and that will let me know as well that you liked this video, and it may become a series. So until next time, I'm Brandon with Your Right Website, and this has been a developer tutorial going over the root stack for WordPress.